The sound was too flat to be a branch breaking. Silas Mercer stopped beside his mule and listened. There it came again, a leather strap striking something softer than wood, followed by a woman's breath forced through clenched teeth. He tied the mule to a lodgepole pine and moved downhill. Snow lay in thin sheets beneath the trees, not enough to hide tracks. A wagon had come off the narrow road and tipped against a stump. One wheel spun slowly in the cold. Beside it, a woman knelt in the mud with two infants wrapped beneath her body. An older man stood over her. He held a driving strap in one hand and a folded paper in the other. "Put your mark on it," he said. "You have no use for that land." The woman raised her head. Blood ran from a cut near her hairline, but her arms remained locked around the babies. "It belongs to Nell and June." The man's face tightened. "It belongs to the family." He lifted the strap. Silas caught his wrist before it fell. For 1 second, none of them moved. The older man stared at the hand around his arm, then at the broad-shouldered stranger standing behind him. Silas wore a buckskin coat darkened by weather, a wool shirt, and a knife at his belt. Nothing about him looked hurried. "Let go," the man said. Silas took the brass clasp from the strap and bent it backward against his thumb until the metal snapped. He dropped both pieces into the snow. The woman said, "No, this is my daughter." Silas looked past him to the woman on the ground. Her eyes were wide and fixed on his hands. Not his face, his hands. He released the man at once and stepped back. The older man rubbed his wrist. "You don't know what she's done. I know what you did." The babies began to cry, one voice strong, the other thin and breathless. The woman shifted to cover them more fully. Her father pointed at the paper. "Her husband left debt. My debt. Her debt. Shaw will take the farm, the house, everything. I am trying to save what remains." "You're trying to trade what isn't yours," she whispered. He turned on her. "Elias is dead. A dead man's scratches in a survey book won't feed children." Silas saw the fear in her change shape. The strap had frightened her. The mention of the survey book frightened her more. The older man saw it too. "Where is it, Mara?" She said nothing. His boot moved toward her. Silas stepped between them. The man stopped. "You have a name?" he demanded. "Silas Mercer." Recognition flickered. Men who worked the freight roads knew the name, even if they had never met him. Silas guided wagons through Granite Pass when other men waited for spring. He found travelers after storms. He also had a reputation for disliking questions. The older man drew himself straighter. "Abram Vale. This concerns my blood." Silas glanced at the babies beneath Mara's coat. "Blood seems to be the trouble." Abram's mouth went hard. He looked toward the road, perhaps calculating the distance to town, the cold, the overturned wagon, and the rifle strapped beneath the driver's seat. Silas had already seen the rifle. So had Mara. "Take one step toward it," Silas said, "and I'll put it where you can't reach." Abram did not test him. Silas crouched several feet from Mara, leaving open ground between them. Up close, he saw bruising along her jaw and raw marks across her shoulders. The twins were wrapped together in a faded blue blanket, one corner stitched with tiny white stars. "Can they travel?" he asked. Mara looked at him as though the question had been spoken in another language. He waited. "I think so." "Can you stand?" She tried. Her left knee folded, and she caught herself with one hand before the infant slipped. Silas did not touch her. "May I help you?" Abram gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "She needs permission now?" Mara looked from her father to the man kneeling in the snow. No one had asked her that in years. Yes, she said. Silas rose and offered his forearm instead of his hand. She gripped the thick sleeve and pulled herself upright. He bore her weight without drawing her closer. Once she was standing, he looked toward the North Trail. My station is 6 miles up Granite Pass. There's a stove, food, and a woman 2 ridges east who knows medicine. Abram stepped forward. She is coming home. Silas ignored him. He kept his attention on Mara. You can go with him. You can come with me, or I can take you wherever you name. The cold air burned inside her chest. Behind Abram waited the house where he had locked food away as punishment, the table where Corbin Shaw had spread papers and smiled while discussing her future, the bedroom where she had slept with both babies against the wall so no one could remove them without waking her. Ahead stood a stranger she had known less than 5 minutes. But he had asked. The choice felt so unfamiliar it frightened her nearly as much as the strap. Mara tightened the blanket around Nell and June. I'm going with you. Abram's face emptied. Then rage rushed back into it. You walk away now. You are no daughter of mine. Mara swayed, but she did not lower her eyes. You made that choice before I did. Silas lifted the wagon's intact supply box and strapped it to the mule. He found a small carpet bag beneath the seat and held it up. Yours? Mara nodded. Abram watched as Silas secured it without opening it. The broken driving strap lay between them in the snow. This will end in Ashwater, Abram said. Shaw owns the clerk, the freight yard, and half the men who carry badges. Mercer cannot hide you forever. Silas checked the mule's cinch. I'm not hiding her. He turned to Mara. Ready? She looked once at the overturned wagon, the folded transfer paper near her father's boot, and the road leading back to the life he had planned for her. Then she walked uphill. The first mile took nearly an hour. Silas shortened his stride and never mentioned it. When Mara's knee weakened, he stopped to adjust the mule's load or inspect the trail, giving her a reason to rest without calling it weakness. At a steep crossing, he carried the twins while she used both hands on the rock. Nell protested the entire time. June wrapped one tiny fist around his beard. Silas froze. Mara expected him to pull away. Instead, he stood there with snow gathering on his shoulders until the baby released him on her own. By late afternoon, the relay station appeared between 2 black ridges. It was larger than Mara expected. A log house with a stone chimney, a stable, a low freight shed, and a hand pump covered against frost. Smoke rose from the chimney. A row of iron bells hung beneath the eaves to warn of wind shifts and animals near the stock. Silas opened the house and lit 2 lamps. The main room held a stove, a table, shelves of dried beans and flour, and more books than Mara had seen outside a schoolhouse. Nothing was delicate, but everything had been repaired instead of discarded. He placed fresh wood near the stove. I'll fetch Lydia Hart. Mara's body tightened. You're leaving? 40 minutes there. Less coming back. She looked toward the door. Silas understood. He took a key from a nail and set it on the table. You lock this from inside. The windows bar too. What if you need to come in? I'll knock. He brought blankets from a chest, then stopped near the threshold. Food's in the cupboard. Water's in the blue pitcher. There's a knife under the flour bin. Mara stared at him. He added, in case knowing helps. Then he stepped outside and closed the door. She locked it. The sound of the bolt sliding into place shook something loose inside her. Mara stood with her forehead against the rough wood, waiting for Silas to try the latch, to call out, to remind her whose house it was. His boots crossed the porch instead. A few minutes later, she heard a horse leave the stable and fade toward the eastern ridge. Dr. Lydia Hart arrived after dark with Silas beside her. She examined Mara, cleaned the cut on her head, wrapped her ribs, and checked both babies. Nell was hungry and furious. June needed warmth and more frequent feeding, but neither child showed signs of fever. "You'll hurt for a while," Lydia said. "That does not mean you're failing to heal." Mara glanced toward Silas. He had remained outside during the entire examination. Lydia noticed. "He'll sleep in the tack shed." "There's only one bed?" "There are two." He still chose the shed. After Lydia left, Silas placed a bowl of stew and fresh bread outside the bedroom door. He did not enter. He did not ask questions about Abram, Shaw, the land, or the survey book. Mara ate with the twins beside her. Later, when the lamps were low and the wind pressed along the roof, she found the knife beneath the flour bin and carried it into the bedroom. She locked the door, slid a chair beneath the knob, and lay down fully dressed with Nell and June in the center of the mattress. For a long time she listened. The stable horse shifted. The iron bells stirred once beneath the eaves. Somewhere beyond the wall, a man coughed. Mara rose and crossed to the small window. A thin line of lantern light shone beneath the tack shed door. Silas Mercer had given her the key to his house, and he had kept his word by sleeping outside it. Morning brought the smell of coffee and the realization that no one had tried her door. Mara removed the chair before she turned the key. The main room was empty. A pot warmed on the stove, and beside it stood a bowl of cornmeal, a jar of molasses, and 2 clean cups. Through the window she saw Silas crossing from the tack shed with an armful of split pine. He stopped when he noticed her. "How are the girls?" "Nell is hungry. June is still sleeping. I can heat water." He did not ask whether he could come closer. He set the wood by the stove and stepped back, while Mara carried the twins into the room. The days that followed were quiet enough to feel suspicious. Lydia returned every afternoon for the first week. She changed Mara's bandages, weighed June in a flour sack, and showed her how to keep both infants warm without smothering them beneath too many blankets. Silas cooked badly, but reliably. His biscuits could have served as trail markers, yet there was always meat in the pot and water heating before Mara asked. She disliked asking. By the 6th morning, she was standing too long at the wash basin when Silas came in carrying a torn grain sack. "You'll open those ribs again," he said. "I cannot lie in your bed and eat your food forever." "It has been 5 days. That is long enough to owe a man." His expression changed. Not anger, but something closed. "You don't owe me for not leaving you in the snow." Mara looked away. "Then give me work." Silas laid the grain sack on the table. "Can you sew canvas?" "I can sew anything that holds still." For the first time, she saw the edge of a smile beneath his beard. The sack led to 3 more. Then to a split mule blanket, 2 leather straps, and a coat whose lining had come loose. Mara worked with June asleep against her chest, and Nell in a basket near her feet. By the end of the week, the station looked less like a place one man endured and more like a place people might return to. What caught her attention, however, was not the torn cloth. It was the paper. Receipts crowded a shelf beside the stove. Freight tickets, feed tallies, toll slips, and scraps bearing numbers in Silas's blunt hand. Some were rolled into jars. Others had been tucked beneath a whetstone or used to level a table leg. Mara pulled one free. "May I?" Silas glanced over from the bench where he was oiling a saddle. "May you what?" "Put these in order." He studied the shelf as though seeing it for the first time. "There is an order." There are 3 receipts from August, beneath a bill from last February. That's the order they landed in." She almost laughed. The sound surprised her enough that it stopped halfway out. Silas turned back to the saddle. "Do what you can." Mara sorted first by year, then by company, route, and cargo. Her husband, Elias, had taught her to read survey marks when failing light blurred his vision. Later, when fever weakened his hands, she had copied whole pages of field measurements while he dictated from bed. Numbers did not frighten her. They held still. They could be checked. By dusk, she had built 6 neat stacks. One slip carried the black pine stamp of Shaw Freight and Timber. Mara read it twice. Silas. He came to the table. "This says 6 wagons of milled lumber crossed the Vale Spring Road last October." He looked over her shoulder. That route was closed. It was supposed to be. Snow took the north grade early. Shaw used every track he could find. He told the land clerk no commercial wagon had touched our spring. Silas's gaze sharpened. Mara found a second receipt. Then a third. All bore different dates. Each named the same water stop, Vale Spring, East Cut. Her fingers began to tremble. "That water is why he wants the land," she said. "Not the pasture, not the cabin." Silas pulled out the chair opposite her. "Sit. I'm not faint. I know. Sit anyway." She did, more from the steadiness of his voice than obedience. June stirred beneath the blue blanket and closed one small hand around Mara's thumb. "Elias kept a survey book," Mara said. "He marked the spring depth, winter flow, every wagon track across the south boundary. Shaw came to our house 3 days after Elias died. He said the book was useless and offered to burn it for me." "Where is it?" Mara hesitated. Silas waited without pressing. "In my carpet bag." She crossed to the bedroom and returned with the bag Abram had watched Silas fasten to the mule. Beneath a spare shift and 2 infant shirts lay a false bottom Elias had built from thin cedar. Mara lifted it and removed a narrow ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Silas did not reach for it. She placed it on the table and opened to the page where Elias had drawn the spring, the burned survey post, and the old wagon cut leading west. Silas compared the marks with the freight receipts. "You have enough to make questions," he said, "not enough to make Shaw answer them. Then I will file a notice before he takes possession. Ashwater's clerk may already have done what Abram wanted." Mara closed the book. "Then I need to see what he filed." They left 2 mornings later. Lydia stayed at the station with Nell and June. Mara resisted the arrangement until Lydia folded her arms and said, "You are allowed to conduct business without proving motherhood every minute of the day." The road to Ashwater descended through granite shelves and stands of white fir. Silas rode beside Mara but allowed her to set the pace. At the lower crossing, he showed her where thin ice dulled from gray to chalk white before breaking. She showed him how Elias had estimated distance using wheel turns and slope. By noon, the town appeared through wood smoke. Ashwater had grown around a freight yard and behaved as if the freight yard owned it. Shaw's black pine mark showed on wagons, warehouse doors, even the lamp posts along the main street. The land office occupied 2 rooms above a feed store. The clerk, Horace Bell, wore silver spectacles and kept his cuffs cleaner than any road in Montana allowed. Mara gave her name. Bell's eyes moved to Silas, then back to her bruised face. "Yes," he said slowly. "Mr. Vale informed us you might come. I want to file notice that no transfer of my property is valid without my signature before witnesses." Bell opened a drawer. "That matter has already been settled." He placed a folded document on the counter. Silas stepped closer. Mara caught his sleeve before he could speak. "Let me see it," she said. Belle hesitated, then turned the paper around. The document described her husband's land, the spring, and the east wagon cut. It claimed Mara Vale had accepted responsibility for Abram Vale's debt and pledged the property to Corbin Shaw in repayment. 2 men had signed as witnesses. At the bottom, in dark, careful ink, was her name. Mara leaned closer. The letters copied the shape of her hand, but not its movement. The capital M was too narrow. The final E curled backward, a habit Abram had tried to force out of her when she was a child. Silas watched her face. "Is it yours?" Mara touched the paper without lifting it. "No." Her voice did not shake. "I never signed this." Horace Bell removed his spectacles and began polishing lenses that were already clean. "A denial does not erase a recorded obligation," he said. "Neither does ink make a lie true." Mara turned the document toward herself. "This boundary description names the west marker as a charred cedar post." Bell frowned. "That is what the survey states. The post burned in the lightning fire of '81. This paper is dated 6 months later. Anyone who stood on that land then would have named the stone stake Elias set in its place." A voice came from the doorway. "Grief can make old details feel certain." Corbin Shaw entered in a clean black coat. Abram followed him. Mara's ribs tightened beneath Lydia's bandage. Shaw offered her a practiced look of concern. "Your father has been worried." Abram stared at Silas. "She belongs at home." Mara kept one hand on the forged paper. "Who witnessed this?" Bell glanced at Shaw. "Cal Rusk and Peter Vane." "Rusk left Montana in September," Silas said. "I guided him to the Idaho line." The room went quiet. Mara saw the change in Shaw's eyes. Until then, he had regarded her as property delayed by weather. Now he saw a problem. "File my objection," she told Bell. "I cannot alter a territorial record over a domestic disagreement." Then record that I appeared and denied the signature. When he still hesitated, voices began gathering on the stairs. Bell finally pulled out a blank sheet and copied her statement. Mara stopped Silas from speaking again with a touch to his wrist. The muscles beneath his sleeve were hard with anger, but he yielded to her judgment. Before leaving, she took Bell's copy and said, "You will see me again." Outside town, Silas asked, "Why stop me?" "If you frightened him, Bell would make your temper the issue instead of my signature. He deserved frightening." "Perhaps, but I need him careless." Silas considered that, then inclined his head toward the oilcloth packet in her lap. "You know this fight better than I do." At Granite Pass, an old freighter named Ben Doran studied the Shaw receipts and gave a low whistle. "Shaw charges customers for the north grade, then runs the cheaper east cut," he said. "Wagon masters remember where they found water in winter. Find the drivers and you have witnesses." For 10 days, Mara and Silas traced names through freight slips and Elias's survey book. She made columns at the kitchen table. Silas learned to put dates in the same place on every page. In return, he taught her how to hear hollow ice beneath a mule's hoof. June often slept against his chest while he worked. At first, he held her like a fragile parcel. Soon she clutched his shirt and snored beneath his beard, while Nell shouted from her basket. 3 wagon masters had signed for water at Vale Spring. 2 were still alive. One evening, Silas found Mara studying the records after the lamps had burned low. "My sister kept papers like those," he said. "Her husband died owing less than a timber company claimed. A clerk accepted another note with her name on it. By the time I returned from the high trails, her cabin was gone. Mara closed the ledger. What happened to her? She spent the first cold month in a church shed. His eyes stayed on the stove. She did not live through the second. Is that why you helped me? It is why I knew where obedience would take you. An iron warning bell struck beneath the eaves. Ben burst through the door. The lower freight bridge is down. Braces were cut. A boy waited outside, blood on one sleeve. His family's wagon had crossed before the bridge collapsed, then broken an axle on the far bank. His mother and two young brothers were trapped below the grade as snow filled the gorge. Silas reached for his coat. Mara opened Elias's survey book. There is another crossing. Ben bent over the page. That creek wall's up west of the bridge. The new creek does. Elias mapped the abandoned bed after the old slide. The slope is shallow here. Silas studied the penciled line. You know the entrance? I know how to find it. You stay with Lydia and the girls. The words cut deeper than he meant them to. Do not protect me by making me useless, Mara said. Silas looked at her, then at the map. You ride beside me. If your ribs turn sharp, you tell me. Lydia took the twins. Mara kissed them both and followed the men into the storm. At the ruined bridge, fresh axe cuts shone in the broken braces. Shaw's black pine mark had been burned into one beam. Mara led them west. Twice, the abandoned channel disappeared beneath drifts. She found it again by matching the ridge angle with a split granite outcrop Elias had drawn in the margin. The stranded family waited beside an overturned wagon. Silas freed the tangled horse while Ben unloaded the cargo. Mara studied the slope and directed them downstream, where the old bed curved toward a low shelf. It took hours to reset the axle and haul the children out. At the steepest turn, a wheel slipped. Mara caught the brake lever. Pain flashed across her ribs, but she held it until Ben drove a block beneath the wheel and Silas braced the wagon with his shoulder. Only then did she let go. You should have told me you were hurting, Silas said. I just did. Something warm moved across his tired face. They reached Granite Pass after midnight. Near the stove, the rescued woman took Mara's hands. My boys are alive because you knew where to look. Mara's old instinct told her to dismiss the praise before someone punished her for accepting it. She let the words stand. Across the room, Silas held June on one shoulder and Nell in the crook of his other arm. He looked wet, exhausted, and completely outnumbered. Mara smiled. He smiled back. By morning, Ben had found the two surviving wagon masters. Both agreed to testify that Shaw's freight crews had used Vale Spring. Mara now had the survey book, the freight records, living witnesses, and a family who had seen her lead men through a storm. For the first time, she possessed more than a claim. She possessed proof. The attack came 2 nights later, while the mountain wind covered the sound of horses. Mara woke to breaking glass and the smell of kerosene. Silas crossed the room barefoot, rifle in hand. Fire climbed the freight shed wall. Take the girls to the spring house. Mara wrapped Nell and June in the blue blanket and pulled the tin box from beneath the bed. The survey book, receipts, and Bell's recorded objection were inside. A burning bottle struck the kitchen wall. She carried the twins through the back door and placed them behind the spring house's stone wall. Then a gunshot cracked. Silas staggered beside the pump, blood spreading across his left shoulder. One attacker rushed him with a timber. Mara seized the iron pump handle and struck the man's wrist. Silas drove him through the shed door, where a burning roof brace fell across his legs. Silas tried to lift it and nearly collapsed. The tin box lay near the flames. Mara could reach the papers, or the trapped man, not both. She threw a horse blanket over the man's burning coat, wedged the pump handle beneath the beam, and leaned down with all her weight. Push! Silas braced with his good arm. The man crawled free. Mara snatched the box as the roof folded, and they escaped before the shed collapsed. The rescued attacker coughed in the snow. Shaw said nobody would be here. Inside his coat, Silas found a folded order bearing the Black Pine stamp. Destroy the Vale survey book. Burn Mercer's records. Leave no copy. Hoofbeats came before dawn. Sheriff Nolan arrived with 4 deputies. Corbin Shaw rode behind them in a clean fur-collared coat. Shaw pointed at Silas. He abducted Abram Vale's daughter, assaulted my employees, and burned bonded freight. Mara held out the scorched order. Your man carried this. Nolan barely looked at it. It can be examined in town. The man I saved will tell you who sent him. The attacker turned away. Shaw said, He is injured and confused. Nolan surveyed the rifle, the wounded men, and the ruins. Silas Mercer, you are under arrest for assault, abduction, and destruction of property. He was shot defending us. Then he can tell the examiner. The deputies bound Silas's wrists. Mara caught his hand before they put him in the wagon. I have the proof. His fingers closed around hers. Then use it. Lydia arrived as the station was sealed. She gathered Nell and June beneath her coat, while Mara stood in the snow holding the blackened tin box. Abram rode beside the sheriff's wagon without looking at his daughter. Mara watched Silas disappear below the bend. Fear opened inside her, waiting for someone to tell her what to surrender. No voice came. She looked down at Shaw's order. Silas had rescued her once. She would not wait to be rescued again. Abram came to Lydia's cabin before noon, carrying the surrender papers in a dry leather case. Sign these, he said, and Shaw will withdraw the charges. Mercer walks free. You and the girls come home. Mara held June against her shoulder. Nell slept in Lydia's arms. You watch them take an injured man to jail. I am trying to save you. No, you are trying to save your debt. Abram's face hardened. Without my name, you have nothing. Mara opened the door. I have my own. He left the papers on the table. She fed them to Lydia's stove. That afternoon, Ben brought the 2 wagon masters. The rescued family agreed to speak. Last came the burned attacker, limping and ashamed. Shaw paid us, he said. He wrote the order himself. Mara placed the scorched paper beside Elias's survey book. Then say it where he can hear you. The hearing filled Ashwater's meeting hall the next morning. Silas stood beside Sheriff Nolan with his wounded arm bound to his chest. Shaw sat near Horace Bell. Abram faced the room as though it still belonged to men like him. He called Mara confused, ungrateful, and controlled by Mercer. Shaw presented the forged pledge. The territorial examiner studied Mara. Mrs. Vale, you have no independent residence. Your father claims custody was taken from him by force. Silas spoke for the first time. Uncuff my right hand. Nolan hesitated. The examiner ordered it. Silas asked Bell for a blank deed. With slow strokes, fighting the pain in his shoulder, he transferred Granite Pass Station and its adjoining acreage to Mara Vale, Nell Vale, and June Vale. No marriage condition, he said. No repayment. No claim retained. The room went still. Mara looked at him. He did not look triumphant. He looked relieved. The examiner stamped the deed. Now, Mara said, turning to Shaw, we can discuss my evidence. She laid out the freight receipts by date. The wagon masters identified their signatures and the water stop at Vale Spring. Elias's survey showed the charred cedar marker had been replaced 6 months before the pledge was supposedly witnessed. Ben identified Shaw's route stamps. The rescued attacker named Shaw as the man who ordered the bridge cut and the records burned. Horace Bell began to sweat. Shaw called the testimony purchased. Mara held up the blackened order. Then explain why your private freight mark is pressed into the wax. Abram lunged across the table for the survey book. A deputy caught him before he reached it. Mara faced her father. You called it family when you used my name without consent. You called it duty when you raised a strap. You called it rescue when you tried to sell my daughter's water. You do not get to hide theft behind blood anymore. Abram's anger faltered under the eyes of the town. The examiner voided the pledge and ordered Shaw, Abram, and Bell held for investigation into fraud, arson, and witness intimidation. Nolan removed Silas's remaining cuff. Outside, Lydia returned the twins to Mara. Silas stepped into the cold beside her. Mara carried the stamped deed in one hand and both daughters against her heart. For the first time, every road ahead belonged to her choice. Silas returned to Granite Pass, only long enough, he told himself, to repair what the fire had taken. By spring, the shed stood again. So did a new sign above the road. Granite Pass Relay, Mara Vale, proprietor. One morning, Mara found Silas fastening his bedroll to the mule. You're leaving. You have the station, the spring, witnesses who know your name. I know, she held out the deed. That is why I can ask without owing you. He looked at her. Stay, she said, not as my rescuer, not as my owner. Stand beside me. Silas lowered his hands. I lived alone because losing no one seemed easier than loving anyone. June reached from Mara's arms and caught his finger. Nell laughed from the doorway. He looked at the house, then at Mara. I'm tired of easier. He unpacked the mule. Years later, travelers found food, warmth, and a locked room of their own at Granite Pass. Above the door hung a second sign, carved by Silas and lettered by Mara. Mara Vale and Silas Mercer. When the first snow came, Nell slept against Mara's shoulder, June held Silas's hand, and the home once built for one lonely man shone across the pass for anyone who needed shelter.